Good day, everyone. This is the first part of our lecture series for the different body systems, specifically for the nervous system. So, in this lecture video, we'll try to discuss the different functions of the nervous system, the different divisions of the nervous system, and the different parts and their respective functions. So to start with, let's try to discuss first or identify first the major functions of the nervous system. So the nervous system is involved in some way in nearly every body function. We can therefore consider the nervous system as a communication system wherein it receives signals from and sending commands to the different areas of the body. Now, by way of this communication, the nervous system then helps to coordinate the body functions to maintain homeostasis. Now, the nervous system has five major functions, and these are first, receiving sensory input. Now, we are all aware that we all have sensory receptors in our body, and these sensory receptors monitor numerous external and internal stimuli. Examples of these external stimuli are vision, hearing, taste, smell, touch, pain, body position, and temperature. Now, examples naman ng internal stimuli are blood pH, blood gases, and blood pressure. Now, all of these stimuli will be received by the sensory receptors and therefore be sent to a certain part of the nervous system and will therefore produce a response or a certain process will occur. Okay, now for the next function of the nervous system is that it integrates information. Now we all know that the major organs of the nervous system are the brain and spinal cord, and these organs are the ones that process the sensory input and will now therefore initiate our certain response. Now, this response can be in the form of an immediate response. It can also be stored as a memory or it can even be ignored. So, yun. That's why one of the function of the nervous system is that it integrates information coming from the sensory inputs. Next function is that it controls muscle and glands. Now, for example, the skeletal muscles, which normally contract, is stimulated by the nervous system. And skeletal muscle controls the major movements of the body, and therefore, um, it controls muscles. Now, the nervous system also participates in controlling cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, and the glands. The glands are controlled by the nervous system, wherein when the nervous system uh, signals a certain glands, the glands will now uh, produce or secrete a certain hormone or a certain substance. Next, maintaining homeostasis. Now, the nervous system plays an important role in maintaining homeostasis. Now, this function depends on the nervous system's ability to detect, interpret, and respond to changes in external conditions. Of course, kapag ang nervous system ninyo hindi siya nagfa-function ng mabuti, then it will therefore affect its ability to detect, interpret, and even respond to certain stimuli. Now, in response, the nervous system can stimulate or inhibit the activities of other systems to help maintain a constant internal environment. And lastly, establishing and maintaining mental activity. Now, the brain is the center of mental activity which includes consciousness, memory, and thinking. Now, all of these are the major functions of the nervous system. So let's now proceed on the different divisions of the nervous system. So we'll try now to identify or list the different divisions of the nervous system, and we will also discuss or describe their characteristics. So the nervous system can be divided into two. So the two divisions are first the central nervous system or the CNS and the peripheral nervous system. Now the central nervous system consists of the brain and the spinal cord, while the peripheral nervous system consists of all the nervous tissue outside the CNS, which includes the nerves and the ganglia. Now, let's discuss how CNS and PNS works together. So let's try to explain or understand further how the PNS and CNS work together by explaining these organizers. So let's start with the sensory input, wherein it can be in the form of the light, sound, taste, smell, touch, temperature, and all of these are the external stimuli, while pain and pressure, this can be the internal stimuli. So all of these stimuli or a stimuli will be received by the sensory receptors, and the sensory receptors now will signal the sensory division or the afferent division of the PNS to conduct an action potential to the CNS. Now, the neurons that will now transmit those action potentials from the peripheral nervous system to the CNS are called the sensory neurons. Okay, so in between the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system, we have the so-called sensory neurons, wherein they are the ones that transmit the action potential from the peripheral nervous system. Now, the next thing that will happen after the signal was transmitted to the central nervous system is that it will now go to the motor division or the efferent division of the peripheral nervous system. Now, this motor division of the PNS conducts action potentials from the CNS to the effector organs such as muscles or glands. Now, the neurons that transmit naman the action potential from the CNS towards the motor division or the peripheral nervous system are called the motor neurons. So, kung natatandaan nyo, dito, from sensory division from PNS to the CNS, we have the sensory neurons. From CNS naman to the PNS or the motor division, we have the so-called motor neurons. Now, the effectors controlled by the motor division includes muscle tissues and glands. Now, we all know that some muscle tissues includes a skeletal muscle which is voluntarily controlled, and we also have the cardiac and smooth muscle which are involuntarily controlled. Now, for the glands naman, they are also involuntarily controlled. Now, the motor division can further be subdivided into the type of effector. Now, we have first the somatic nervous system, wherein it transmits action potentials from the CNS to the skeletal muscles. Now, yung autonomic nervous system naman, it transmits action potentials from the CNS to cardiac muscles, smooth muscles, and glands. Now, the autonomic nervous system, in turn, can be further divided into sympathetic or the parasympathetic division. Okay? And lastly, of course, after it runs through the motor division, papunta dun sa effector, which can be the skeletal muscle or the cardiac and smooth muscle or the glands, will now be a motor output, which can be in the form of a movement, mag-change yung metabolism, bibilis yung heart rate or mag-slow yung heart rate, bibilis yung breathing rate, mga ganun. So, that's how the peripheral nervous system and central nervous system works together. So moving on, we also have what we call the enteric nervous system, which is a unique subdivision ng peripheral nervous system. Now, itong ENS na to has both the sensory and motor neurons contained wholly in the digestive tract. Now, the ENS can even function without the input from the CNS or other parts of the PNS, although normally it's integrated with the CNS by the sensory neurons and the autonomic nervous system neurons. So, yun. So that's the enteric nervous system. So now let's go through the different cells of the nervous system, and there are two types of cells that make up the nervous system, which are, of course, we have the neurons or the nerve cells, and we have also the glial cells or the neuroglia. Now let's discuss how the two different cells differ and what kind of subcells or even parts do they have. So let's describe first what is a neuron, what are its different parts, and ano yung mga function ng mga parts na yun. So first, let's describe first what is a neuron. So a neuron receives stimuli, conducts action potentials, and transmits signals to other neurons or effector organs. Now when we say effector organs, examples of this, we have mentioned na kanina, are the cardiac muscles, the glands, and the skeletal muscles. So, going back, a neuron has three parts. We have the cell body, which sometimes called soma. We have the dendrite, and we also have the axon. Now, the cell body contains, obviously, the nucleus. As with any other cell, the nucleus of the neuron is the source of information for gene expression. Now, the dendrites, on the other hand, are short, often highly branching cytoplasmic extensions that are tapered from their bases at the neuron cell body to their tips, meaning panipis ng panipis as it goes to its tip. Now, most dendrites are extensions of the neuron cell body, but dendrite-like structures also project from the peripheral ends of some sensory axons. Now, dendrites usually receive the information from the other neurons or from sensory receptors and transmit the information toward the neuron cell body. Now, each neuron has an axon, wherein it is a single long cell process extending from the neuron cell body. Now, the area where the axon leaves the neuron cell body is called the axon hillock. Each axon has a uniform diameter and may vary in length from a few millimeters to more than a meter. So, axons of sensory neurons conduct action potentials toward the CNS, and axons of motor neurons conduct action potentials away from the CNS. So, I think we already have mentioned the difference between the sensory neuron and the motor neuron kanina. So axons also conduct action potentials from one part of the brain or spinal cord to another part. So, yun ang axon. Okay? Ngayon, we'll discuss first, before we discuss the other parts like the Schwann cell, the axon terminals, and the node of Ranvier, we'll discuss first the different types of neurons. So at this point, we'll discuss the different types of neurons. So basically, neurons also vary in function and also in their structure. And this time, yeah, we'll discuss the different types of neurons. So if you try to go back to my discussion dun sa organization of the nervous system kanina, I have mentioned already the difference between a sensory neuron and a motor neuron. Those two neurons are under the types of neurons in terms of their function. Okay? Now, we will discuss naman or we will try to identify the different types of neurons in terms of their structure. So in terms of their structure, there are three categories ng neurons based on the arrangement of their processes. And when we say processes, by the way, when we are talking about neurons, we are referring to the dendrite and the axon of the neuron. So going back, we have three categories, as I have mentioned earlier, of neurons. We have the bipolar, the pseudo-unipolar, and the multipolar. Okay? And let's discuss first, or let's describe first multipolar neurons. So multipolar neurons have many dendrites and a single axon. Also, most of the neurons within the CNS and nearly all motor neurons are multipolar. So this is structure. This is the structure of a multipolar neuron. Now, bipolar neurons naman have two processes, one dendrite and one axon. So bipolar neurons are located in some sensory organs such as in the retina of the eye and in the nasal cavity. Ngayon, yung ibang sensory neurons, they are considered as pseudo-unipolar. So pseudo-unipolar neurons have a single process extending from the cell body. Now, this process divides into two processes, a short distance from the cell body. So this is a pseudo-unipolar structure of a neuron. So, etong unipolar, by the way, this is the most basic structure ng neuron. That's why it's not under the different types na ng neuron. So, ito yung tatlong ito yung different types or classification ng neurons in terms of their structure. So at this point, we'll discuss glial cells or what we call the neuroglia. So glial cells are the supportive cells ng CNS and PNS, meaning these cells do not conduct action potentials. So instead, glial cells carry out different functions that enhance neuron function and maintain normal conditions within the nervous tissue. Now, neuroglia are far more numerous than neurons. So most neuroglia retain the ability to divide, whereas neurons do not. So that's one specific difference between the glial cells and the neurons. So ang neurons hindi na sila nagdi-divide, while the glial cells still has the ability to divide. So yun. And the types of glial cells are different also in the central nervous system versus the peripheral nervous system. So in the CNS, there are four types of glial cells, and in the PNS, we have two types naman. So let's discuss them one by one on the next slide. Under peripheral nervous system, we have the satellite cells. We also have the Schwann cells. And under central nervous system, we have the microglia, the oligodendrocytes, the ependymal cells. We also have the astrocytes. Now, let's discuss them one by one by starting here in the central nervous system. So let's start with the microglia. So microglia are a type of course, the neuroglia or the glial cell, which are located throughout the brain and the spinal cord. So microglia account for 10 to 15% of all cells found within the brain. So as the resident macrophage cells, meaning these microglia are macrophage cells, they act as the first and main form of active immune defense in the central nervous system. So they act as the uh, defense system of the central nervous system. That's the microglia. And this is the structure of the microglia here. Now, for the astrocytes, astrocytes serve as the major supporting cells in the central nervous system. So in this role, astrocytes can stimulate or inhibit the signaling activity of nearby neurons. In addition, astrocytes also participate with the blood vessel endothelium to form a permeability barrier called the blood-brain barrier between the blood and the central nervous system. So, meaning astrocytes help to limit the damage to neural tissue. However, the repair process can form a scar that blocks regeneration of damaged axons. So that is, or that, yeah, that's the function of the astrocytes. Now, for the ependymal cells, these cells protect the brain by removing bacteria and cell debris. That's the work of the ependymal cells. Now, for the oligodendrocytes naman, they provide an insulating material that surrounds axons. So, yun, that's the oligodendrocytes. So, these are just the supporting cells or yes, supporting cells of the central nervous system. Now, for the peripheral nervous system naman, we also have supporting cells for that one. Now, first we have the Schwann cells. So, Schwann cells, these are glial cells that provide insulation material around the axon. So, kung napapansin nyo, it's the counterpart of oligodendrocytes in the central nervous system. Now, how about the satellite cells? So satellite cells, or what we call the myosatellite cells, these are muscle stem cells. They are multipotent cells with very little cytoplasm found in mature muscles. So satellite cells are precursors to skeletal muscle cells, which are able to give rise to satellite cells or differentiated skeletal muscle cells. So that is the function of the satellite cells. They are found in muscles and they are stem cells, meaning they can uh, give rise to another differentiated cell. So those are the different types of glial cells under each division of the nervous system. So now let's move on naman sa organization of the nervous tissue. So sometimes maybe you have heard the term gray matter and white matter already. So kung sa physical science or sa earth science ninyo, you have heard the dark matter. Then in the nervous tissue, we also have what we call the white matter and the gray matter. So let's try to discuss ano yung difference ng dalawang yun. So, the nervous tissue varies in color or may gray matter and white matter because of the location, the arrangement ng parts ng neurons, and the glial cells that are present in the nervous tissue. Now, gray matter consists of neuron cell bodies and their dendrites where there is very little myelin. If you know myelin sheath, if familiar kayo dun sa term, I forgot to mention kanina, but myelin sheath is a specialized layer that wraps around the axons of some neurons. So collectively, siya yung oligodendrocytes and the Schwann cells. Okay, so yun. In the central nervous system, gray matter on the surface of the brain is called the cortex. And clusters of gray matter located deeper within the brain are called nuclei. Okay. Now, similarly, the peripheral nervous system contains gray matter din. And in the PNS, a cluster of neuron cell bodies is called a ganglion. So that's the gray matter in the PNS. Now, going to the white matter naman, white matter consists of bundles of parallel axons with their myelin sheaths which are whitish in color. Now, white matter of the central nervous system forms nerve tracts or conduction pathways which propagate action potentials from one area of the central nervous system to another. Now, the white matter naman sa peripheral nervous system natin, they consist of bundles of axons and associated connective tissue that form nerves. So that's the white matter in the peripheral nervous system. So basically, the things that I have discussed in this lecture video are just introductory. Those are just basic information when talking about the nervous system. So on the next lecture video naman, I'll discuss the anatomy and physiology of the brain and the spinal cord. So see you all on the next lecture video.